let me get right into it then. Welcome back to Hanging Einstein. This is I'm Andy Singleton, People's Fan on Twitter. This is another edition of the special draftbreakdown.com NFL Draft Series. And I am going to get right into it because I have probably the best guest I could possibly ever imagine to get for this, and that is Mr. Phil Savage himself. Phil, Mr. Savage, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good, Andy, and you could certainly call me Phil. You know, in the NFL, that's the big distinction between college and pro football. Everybody's on a first-name basis.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. And let me first congratulate you. I understand there's a new addition to your family.
Yes, we added a little boy to our mix 3 weeks ago. It happened to coincide with the Combine, so that was the first time I've missed the Combine since 1991.
Wow,
a big deal.
Wow, yeah, I remember seeing that. So that's a very good and valid reason though to miss it. So congratulations on that. And let me be the first, hopefully first, to give you an early birthday wish. I know you have a birthday coming up in a couple weeks as well. So
yeah, it always gets overrun by all the draft prep.
big spring in the Savage household. But you may mention I have the Veet shirt on, so I'm going to give you a couple minutes to get into your background, and then I'd like to ask you some more draft related stuff, given your incredibly impressive resume and background. But you mentioned the Veet shirt. This is the local hangout spot when everybody heads down to Mobile. But you are from Mobile originally?
Yes, I was born and raised here in Mobile, and actually went to probably my first Senior Bowl practices when I was in first or second grade. So, I don't know if that had any influence or impact on a career choice. I mean, at the time, you're just going to get autographs and see the players. And
right.
I mean, in those days, it was Don Shula and Bum Phillips and Chuck Noll and coaches like that walking all around,
Wow.
Mobile. And so, I played high school football here at Murphy High, and then was a baseball player too. And in all reality, Andy, I had one opportunity to go to college, and that was at a small Division III school called Sewanee. It was
Okay.
about 7 hours from here. It's in the state of Tennessee, near Chattanooga, and it's sort of a knockoff version of an Ivy League, very academically oriented school. But anyway, I went there. I played both sports for 4 years, and really it was my senior year of college, and it dawned on me that you're not going to be playing anymore. So
Right.
what are you going to do next? And there were several guys that were older than me that had gone on to graduate assistantships in coaching. Places like Middle Tennessee or Austin P, UT Chattanooga.
Mm-hmm.
And I commenced to send letters to, schools all over the country, and really in hopes of going into coaching and maybe catching on at a program of that level.
Right.
I sent 70 letters out. I got 65 no's, 3 never heard froms, and 1 maybe and 1 yes. And the 1 yes was at the University of Alabama, of all places,
Wow.
about 4 hours from here in Mobile. Well, obviously, you get a chance to go to Alabama, a very noteworthy football program, you're going to go. And, it's just like any other business. You get into it and you start meeting people. The world gets smaller in whatever, path you're on. And, I spent 3 years at Alabama. I ended up on the field as a coach. I coached the tight ends for 2 years.
Wow.
With your affiliation to the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, I coached Howard Cross his senior year, who is now a longtime pro for the Giants and now the sideline reporter for the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I went to UCLA with one of the assistant coaches, a man named Homer Smith, who had a major influence on my football background. He carried me to UCLA with him. One connection led to another, and Bill Reese, who was the recruiting coordinator at UCLA, he had been a graduate assistant in the 70s with a guy named Ernie Adams. And Ernie is Bill Belichick's best friend. And
Wow. Okay.
Ernie was a young coach, then got out of the business, went to Wall Street in the 1980s, and then was going to come back with Bill as one of his assistants in 1991 after the Giants won the World Championship. Belichick was going to get the Tampa job or Cleveland, one or the other. And long story short, I ended up on his coaching staff as a quality control coach. Spent 3 years with Nick Saban as the defensive coordinator. We had an all-star cast of coaches and people there. And after 3 years, and I'll get to the end of the story here in a moment. After 3 seasons of being on the field as a coach, Bill approached me and said, "Look, you're in a situation where you're a low-level coach, but I really think you've helped us in the spring getting ready for the draft, evaluations, working players out, because I think it's something that could really round out your resume. Would you consider going over there for a year?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." And so I went into scouting in 1994 as sort of a 1-year trial. I thought I would come back to coaching. And I got out on the road and actually enjoyed it, loved every minute of it, and felt like that I wanted to stay on that side of the building. Of
Wow.
course, a year later, Cleveland moved. We became the Baltimore Ravens. Bill and some of the other leaders of the organization were fired. Ozzie Newsome was elevated to really in charge of all football operations. He was not the GM at that time, but he was the number one person there, decision maker. And so, Ozzie and I had worked together for 5 years. He promoted me to college scouting director. And really, once that happened, we drafted well. We won a Super Bowl in 2000. I got a chance to go back to Cleveland and be the GM there, 05 to 08. Then after I was released from the Browns, I spent 2 years with the Eagles. And then the Senior Bowl job opened up, and I just felt like it was an opportunity. It was something I'd grown up with. I've seen this game, Andy, from through a child's eyes, trying to find autographs, all the way up to being a GM, trying to find players. And so I do think I bring a really unique perspective to it in terms of what the game means to the NFL, what the game means to the players themselves, what the game means to the local community. So it's been 4 really enjoyable years. It's the greatest ambassadorial role in all of football when you consider the fact that we're connected to all 32 clubs, hundreds of colleges, the national media, and all of the agents. So it's really a connector type role, and I'm enjoying it a lot.
Well, you listen, your stories can take as long as you need to get them out, because I guarantee you people are tuning in to see you and not me. I'm just trying to draw some good questions out of you. But that is fascinating, and really, what I was alluding to, like why you actually are like the perfect person to talk to, especially during the draft process, because you do have that pro experience, you have the college experience, just every aspect of coaching to general manager, player development, scouting. It's you've run the full gamut of positions in football. I wanted to go back real quick, though. You mentioned you sent out 70 letters and got 65 no's and 3 never heard froms. Were the 3 never heard froms more frustrating than the 65 no's? Because I find when I'm trying to get guests for this show to reach out to people, you almost feel better, like at least you acknowledged me. I got a no from you, and then it kind of did even get it. Should I resend it?
I think. I was very excited when those first few letters started coming back. I remember the first couple were Joe Paterno at Penn State, Don James at Washington, Danny Ford at Clemson. And, you're excited. You open it, and it's like, hey, we don't really need you. We'll let you know. We'll put your resume on file. And after you got through, 60 plus of those, I don't know that it really mattered too much on the never heard froms. I think that the moral of the story, the lesson to be learned, though, is the reality that you don't need 70 colleges to want to hire you as a graduate assistant. All you need is one.
Right.
And, my football life, in all honesty, has always just sort of been one door being open. I had one chance to go play Division III football. I had one chance to go be a graduate assistant. at Alabama, and you've got to be willing to walk through that door. And some people say, well, it's not really what you know, it's who you know. But I will say this to you: it's what you know once you get there. It
Yeah.
is what will keep you there. And you in this business, you're going to be told a lot. You're going to be told no a lot, and you're going to miss a lot of players. You're going to misevaluate people, but you just have to continue to try to perfect your craft and work at it, learn from your mistakes, and keep going.
Yeah, it's one thing to get the job; it's another thing to be able to keep the job. But I also wanted to make mention of what makes people successful in organizations, coaches, whatever, is forward thinking. And there's a fine line between too progressive and too forward, but actually willing to take a chance. And you mentioned like Alabama, you were surprised to hear from them. That's why they're such a great program. They're willing to give you a shot. You didn't have the biggest resume at that time, but we're willing to give you a shot. You mentioned Bill Belichick saying, hey, you did pretty good with this. I'm going to give you a bigger role now, and taking a shot with you. And it really speaks to why certain people are successful, because they're willing to take the risks involved. You also mentioned that the whole Browns history and everything, and I was watching a Football Life that you were a part of with the whole Belichick and Saban and you as well, and pointing at the TV, telling my fiance that I'm hopefully going to have Phil on, so she's a fan of yours as well now. But that leads me to kind of the whole draft process, and you mentioned all the different roles you had. Is there a different opinion that you have in looking at a player, evaluating a player from either a coaching perspective, a scouting perspective, or a general manager? Are your views different?
Yeah, that's really a good question. Just to go back to something you said a moment ago, really life, but sports in general, it's a people game. And, the relationships you have with people is so important because you just never know when the door is going to close.
Mm-hmm.
You just never know quite, you know, I was the young guy at one point, and I remember some of the older guys being nice to me and showing me different things and trying to be a mentor. And I tried to take a lot of pride in that over the years and helping younger guys that wanted to break into the football world, whether it was as a coach or scout. And there's a connectedness there between people that really goes above and beyond the wins and losses. And of course, that's what people are judged on. But having a sports life it's not easy, but it's also very rewarding too. But you ask about looking at players and evaluating players. There's no question, as you look at these guys through different lenses, you're going to have different perspectives. In a general sense, coaches want to win yesterday. So it's all about what can that player give me right now, most of the time. For a general manager who's been hired by the owner to protect the best interests of the club, not only now but in the future, that general manager is always mindful of, okay, what's this player not only going to give us today, but 2 or 3 years from now.
Right.
So more of a projected type role with the GM. And, I skipped over the scout. The scout that's on the road, has the western area of the country or the southeast or whatever the case might be. His job is to go evaluate all the players, all of the seniors and potential juniors at the schools that he's been assigned to.
Mm-hmm.
And then, be able to advocate for or against a given player. But even at that, sometimes, you can get frustrated as a scout if you feel like, okay, management's not really listening to me.
Right.
And so you can take it so far, and then you have to pass the baton on to someone else who will ultimately make that decision of whether a player is going to be picked or not drafted or what have you. So, my point is that whatever role you're in, you absolutely have to evaluate these players from that perspective,
Right.
understanding that The coach is going to think one thing, the scout's going to think another. You may have a different opinion. The salary cap guy may have one. But the bottom line is, someone in the organization, whether it's the head coach or the general manager or president, someone has to ultimately look at that room and say, hey, this is what we're going to do.
Right. Now, as somebody that was a coach and the general manager, do you think this final say should come down to the head coach, or do you think the general manager should have the final decision? And if you can't answer that, I understand. But
I think in an ideal world, you'd like for the general manager to have the final say on the draft and on free agency as you're putting the club together, with a ton of input from the head coach. Essentially, you're in lockstep. But this is what I would say to you, Andy. For the long-term health or benefit of your organization, if you have a general manager and his staff and football operations in place, if you cycle through 2 or 3 coaches, at least you're not pushing the reset button every time you start over. I'll give you a perfect example. I think everyone would agree the Oakland Raiders seem to be a team that's on the move. They're on the rise. They look like they're pointed in the right direction. Well, they hired Reggie McKenzie as the GM. He comes from the Green Bay Packer background, where they're going to rely on the draft, and they're going to get some anchored players in there.
Right.
They've been able to do that, but they've cycled through 2 or 3 coaches. Now they're on their 3rd coach with Jack Del Rio, but one side of the organization has maintained its continuity, and they've been able to do that. I think back to my own experiences with the Ravens. Probably the wisest move that Art Modell made in his tenure as the owner of the Ravens was that after he fired Coach Ted Marchibroda after 3 years, he kept Ozzie Newsome and the rest of the staff in place. Because if he had pushed the button and said, hey, everybody's gone, the Ravens wouldn't be what they are today. Ozzie's been in that role now for 20 years. They've been through 3 different coaches over 20 years. Organization that a lot of clubs don't have, and it takes a ton of patience. It takes a lot of nerve. It takes guts, backbone, whatever you want to call it, to say, hey, let's stabilize one side of our building. Let's anchor that in, and then we'll build out around it. And the way that the coaching profession is right now, the Bill Belichick in New England for 16 years is extremely rare.
Yes.
If you can get 7, 8 years out of a coach, I would say that's almost an expected timeline, lifespan, so to speak, the way it is now.
Right.
If you do anything beyond that, you're doing really, really well.
Well, the other thing too, and kind of make like an analogy, is as a general manager, it's like you built this car from scratch. You refurbished a classic car, and rather than drive it yourself, you're trusting your teenage son who just started driving to chauffeur you around town, and you're putting the whole organization in somebody else's hands that you've built. So I definitely get what you're saying, and appreciate what you're saying as far as keeping the philosophy and continuity of it.
In my opinion, too, there are some coaches that are very capable of doing personnel, very capable. There are other coaches, quite honestly, that are not that interested in watching players. They're more interested in schemes and those sorts of things. And so I've had experiences with several different coaches in terms of what their perspective was on player personnel. I mean, they're all, quote, interested because they know these are the guys that we're going to have to coach. But some are more devoted, dedicated to it than others.
Right.
Some are really good at it, and surprisingly, others are not as good at it.
Right.
And I think part of it is just your background, your training, what have you. The most important thing, though, as far as the draft, is when you have a matched vision of the player from a coaching and player personnel perspective. In other words, when the coaches and the scouts vision and see where this player is and where he wants to be or needs to be 2 years, 3 years down the road, those are the perfect draft picks.
Right. I'm going to get back to the combine in 2 seconds. I just had a side question. Speaking about the coach and general manager dynamic, they kind of differ in terms of how the player feels, if they're on your side or, you know, the guy that's going to drop the hammer on you as the general manager sometimes. So did you enjoy being a coach more, where you kind of, you know, in this, you know, trust with the players all the time? Or did you enjoy being a general manager more, where you kind of had a little bit of that fear in the player, where this could ultimately be the guy that, you know, tells me I'm no longer welcome here?
Yeah. You know, coaching, one of the real differences between coaching and scouting is in coaching, you're emotionally invested with every player, and you're going to win and lose together. And there's a lot of ups and downs over the course of the OTAs and the mini camps, and then the preseason, and then the regular season. I mean, you are really fully engaged with the players, and you know the wins and losses. From a scouting standpoint, I'm not really speaking of the GM here. I'm just talking from a road scout standpoint.
Right.
Well, you're by yourself. You're probably going to see a couple of the team games during the year live. The rest of the time, you're going to be watching on TV or Red Zone channel, or what have you. Um, and yes, you have an emotional connection, especially if it's a player who came out of your area, or you feel responsible for draft, recommending that he be drafted. But regardless of the win or loss on Sunday, you've got to report to University of Texas or Miami of Ohio or wherever it is on Monday and do the same job regardless.
Right.
You know, with coaching, you've got 16 games, really 20 plus the playoffs. And if something goes wrong, you've got the next week to, redeem yourself, if
Right.
you will.
Right.
In scouting, it's once a year. You do all this preparation. It's like a year-round project, so to speak, and you get one shot at it. So there's some really different dynamics between the two jobs. I would say that the least enjoyable part of being a GM is knowing that you're responsible for determining whether a player is going to be with your club or not. And that's a responsibility and an obligation that comes with the job. It's not fun to tell someone they're not good enough to be on your team. It's not fun to tell somebody, hey, after so many years, it's just not, we're going in a different direction.
Right.
I didn't enjoy that part at all. I will tell you this, though, Andy, and it's been something that I've enjoyed hearing over the years is I've had different players that ended up getting cut by us who went on and did great things with other teams or kept their hopes alive and ended up making it in the league, come back and say, look, what you told us on the way out the door really resonated with me, that don't give up on your dream. It didn't work out here, but it could very well work out somewhere else. And there have been several players tell me that over the years, and you try to turn a negative into a positive, really.
Yeah, and I could totally relate to that and see that, because you are such a nice guy and a great guy. So even in delivering bad news, I'm sure you put a positive spin on it. So I can definitely get that. Coming kind of full circle, at the same time as the combine happens and we're prepping for the draft, NFL free agency, kind of explodes onto the scene. So putting your general manager hat back on, are you more interested in building your team through free agency, or are you more interested in the draft, or does it not matter? It's really what your options are based on salary cap and draft position and that kind of stuff.
I would say in an ideal circumstance, everyone's going to say we want to build through the draft. I think at least 2/3, you're hoping to build 2/3 of your team through the draft and young talent. You want to use free agency as a supplement, as a tool to replace maybe players where you didn't draft well.
Mhm.
And, if you can ever get to a point where you have your core group of draft picks that are on the team, then you can add selective free agents. I don't think free agency in and of itself is a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing when you end up having to go put together a team of all-stars, because it's extremely difficult in football to take 5 or 6 or 7 new players on one side of the ball and pull them all together and then go compete against clubs and teams that have had more consistency and continuity, and the guys have played together under the same coach in the same system.
Right.
That's an uphill fight. Uh, the struggle for the lower tier teams in the league that are devoid of talent is the fact that, hey, we've got to compete. We've got to go out there and find some players that can fill these holes that we have on this roster.
Right.
And the one variable that you can never account for is injury. And you go pay top dollar, top shelf money. Typically, you go pay A level money for B level prospects, because most of the time the very, very best players don't get to the open market. Some do, but there's usually some reason why that happens. And that club that let that player get out there knows it, and oftentimes you don't.
Right.
But injuries are the variable that you cannot control, you cannot predict. And I know in my time in Cleveland as the GM, we had 2 devastating injuries that, as I look back on it, we really were never able to quite overcome. LaCharles Bentley, the center, who was a native of Cleveland,
Mhm.
desperately wanted to come back and play for us, got hurt on the first play of training camp in 2006 and never played again. And then Gary Baxter was a player that we had drafted in Baltimore. We signed him as a free agent to come over to Cleveland when I first got there. He ended up having a double knee injury, both legs simultaneous, and was never able to come back to the level that he made a comeback, but he wasn't able to sustain it. And those 2 players, we really spun our wheels in many respects, because now those were 2 gaping holes that you had to try to figure out, plus the other issues that we were having. So it sometimes it's just bad luck.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned bringing a bunch of names together, kind of like an all-star team, and the continuity and cohesion. And it just kind of illustrates that individual players get recognized, but it's really a team sport at its essence. And you really need, all 53 and even the practice squad, all as one unit together. So I know we're running close for time, and you're a busy guy. I do want to ask you a couple speed round questions, but before I get to that, I've also tried to swindle some prizes for the viewers out of my guests. So is there anything maybe Senior Bowl related? I know I have my mini helmet here, but is there anything I can maybe get you to commit to? Maybe something like that, or a koozie or a shirt or something like that maybe I can raffle off to somebody in the future?
Yeah, we can send you a little gift bag of some kind.
All right, sounds good.
Our stock is running low from Reese's, though, so
Okay.
it's Easter season, and they're involved, of course, the NCAA tournament. So our shelves are a little light right now.
Okay, I can imagine so. So a couple quick speed round questions, if you will. You mentioned you missed the NFL Combine this year. How important is the Combine? Is it do we make too much out of it?
It's a piece of the puzzle. This is what I would say to you, Andy. For the seniors, the guys that have been evaluated for the last 9 or 10 months, this is the period on the end of the sentence. As a scout and in player personnel, you're hoping that their numbers, their measurables, will actually match up with what you thought of them as a player. In other words, if you think a guy's a good player, you're hoping he does well at the Combine.
Right.
If you've downgraded a player and you don't think much of him, if he ends up running a bad time, you're almost like, okay, we were right in terms of our evaluation. So for the seniors, it is a piece of the puzzle, a small piece. For the juniors, though, the underclassmen that just declared in January, it's a more significant piece, because now you're talking about this year 107 total players that the clubs are trying to get their arms around, evaluate in person, on tape, get their measurables, all those sorts of things. And the performance at the combine for a junior can absolutely begin to dictate how he's seen over the month of March until he either runs or works out again. And then, this is a small community of NFL people. They all talk. And so if you perform well at the combine and you get, the whole league or the people that are coaching your position to talk well of you, all of a sudden, now your reputation's preceding itself as that I'm a good player. If you go and bomb out at the combine, these guys are pretty harsh. They'll say, yeah, he looked terrible at the combine. Now all of a sudden that can really send you down a path that, you don't want to be on as a potential draft pick. So I think the answer is twofold. For the seniors, it's important, but not as important because we really know those players. For the juniors, it's more important because you're still building the resume of that player, the pro.
Okay. Did I lose you there?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Bill Belichick, behind the scenes, grumpy or funny?
Both.
Okay.
He's got a good sense of humor. It doesn't come out all the time. It does behind the scenes more. I've always said, people ask me to compare he and Nick Saban because, we all work together. Nick is much more emotional, off the cuff. If something goes wrong, he's going to let you know about it in no uncertain terms. But 5 minutes later, it's over with. With Bill, much more reserved, more quiet in nature, but extremely sarcastic. And I mean, he can hit you with a needle that makes you feel like you're that tall and the dumbest guy in the building. So they have their own ways of motivating people. But, the thing that separates Bill from most everyone else is the fact that he can walk out on the field today and coach all 22 positions plus the specialists to a technique and understanding level that a lot of assistant coaches can't do. And so he really is a terrific teacher of the game. He's got a huge appreciation for the sport, and he's earned his place as one of the all-time greats.
Okay, good answer. And I could have a couple more I could ask you, but I know I gotta let you go soon. So I'll hit you with kind of another tough one related to your former team. And Johnny Manziel, hot player, hot topic. If you're a general manager, are you taking a shot on him as a reclamation project, or? And I don't mean to make you talk specifically about anybody, but it's a guy like a Johnny Manziel.
I'll go back to when he came out at Texas A&M. I do the color on the radio for Alabama. So I saw Manziel, in his greatest moments because he beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa in his sophomore year. And then, Bama beat A&M in a shootout his junior year out there. I always thought that for Manziel, he needed to go to an organization that was in the Sun Belt or indoors. In other words, they were going to be playing in good weather or an indoor stadium in a more controlled environment, A. B, I thought he needed to go to a place where there was at least a flavor of college coaching on the staff that could mold and wrap what he does best, build an offense around his skill set. So when you say that, the moment he was picked to go to the Browns, I really clenched my teeth for him and them because, A, weather conditions. You never know in that division, a very rugged physical division, unknown weather elements in Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. So I thought that was going to be problematic. And then the second thing is I thought that they really were not willing. They tried to pour him into their scheme rather than pouring their scheme around him. And for obvious reasons, with all the things that took place off the field, there was no trust there, so they weren't going to do it. answer your original question, I think it's going to be tough for any of these teams to say, hey, we want to bring him in. And it's not because of ability, it's because of the off the field concerns and the distraction and the media attention that's going to come to a player that right now is not going to be anything more than a second or third string quarterback.
Right. Okay. I like that answer. I like that answer a lot. Any plans to get back into coaching, scouting, management, or are you happy where you are with the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, I really enjoy what I'm doing right now. We all have different missions in life at different points. With my wife having two small children, this job really affords me the ability to be home more often than not. It affords me the ability to have a life outside of football, although everything that I do is somewhat connected to the game. So I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I would never say never. I spent 20 years in the NFL. I never thought I'd be out of it. I thought I would stay in it forever. But this opportunity presented itself. And Andy, the fact that they've had 5 directors in 64 years, you can't find this kind of stability outside of the Pittsburgh Steelers maybe. And so I'm enjoying where I am right now. And, we'll see what the future holds. But a lot of people didn't think I would stay here for a game or two, and it's already been 4. So the time flies by really fast.
Well, you're doing a masterful job at it. And I want to thank you personally for having gone to the last 2 and just feeling welcome. And I'm not an NFL GM. I'm not a scout. I'm not a player. But I felt just as important and just as entitled to be there as anybody else. And that goes to just the environment that's been created and that you've enhanced. And it goes a long ways to, just people involved in football, whether it's college, the NFL, or the crossover. So I want to thank you for that.
I appreciate you saying that. We try to treat our media guests the same, whether they're from USA Today or the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
If someone's interested enough to come to Mobile, Alabama, to spend a week with us, we want to make sure that you have a positive experience and get what you need. And that's one of the real secrets about the Reese Senior Bowl. When our players leave the stadium after the game on Saturday, that's really the last time that the fans and the media will have that kind of access, because everything from this point forward for them is so controlled and credentialed and gated up and guardrails, and it's just a really open environment here, and it's one that is at a grassroots level, even though it's really grown a lot over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, well, it's a phenomenal experience for everybody, and like I said, from NFL personnel themselves, who I get to hang out with and at Veets and rub shoulders with, just to being on the in the stands and seeing stuff the same way. So I want to thank you tremendously for giving me the time today to come on. Like I said, I could have asked you questions for the next week, but I know you're a very busy man, especially this time of year. Do you want to plug anything? Tell anybody how they can find you or where they should find you?
Yeah, I would say, we've got our own website here, seniorbowl.com. It's got a ton of information on it. And what we've tried to do, Andy, is build out a calendar for the players that we're interested in through the fall, the ones that actually come in for the game and then follow them and promote them, advocate for them all the way through the draft. And once they even get to the NFL, we have our Hall of Fame event coming up in 2 weeks. Bill Curry, Steve Hutchinson, Tamba Hali going in as former Senior Bowl participants, and then Tyler Lockett was our Rookie of the Year choice. And so he's going to be in town here as well. But our website is great. You can follow me on Twitter at Senior Bowl Phil. And then, of course, you catch me on Sirius XM NFL most every Thursday night from now through the draft. But I'll sub in. They use me a lot over there on Channel 88. And then, of course, I'll be at ESPN with NFL Insiders and some of their coverage for the draft throughout the month of April. So I've already got 6 days in Bristol scheduled for April.
All those names and Hanging Einstein. You've had Senior Bowl Phil with me today. my guest, Mr. Savage, I want to thank you, and I hope everybody's enjoying these, and hope you'll tune in for the next one. I got to let Phil go. He's got, as you heard, many other things to attend to today, so thank you again for your time.
All right, Andy, be good, man. I appreciate it.
You as well.